everybody, welcome back. It's Christina again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a bearded Reedling. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet. I'm drawing straight into Photoshop, so let's get arting. Alright, here is the bearded Reedling. I seriously debated about having the feet underneath, but you can find a lot of them will be like holding on to reeds. And they're such these round birds, it looks so comical and cartoon-like, but it's real, that they're just like hanging on to reeds, and I think that's hilarious. So I decided to draw it with its legs out as if it were holding a reed, but not actually draw the reeds it was holding on to, and then have, his tail coming down behind him. There are only a couple of colors. They have like this light brown on the outside. I'm going to have brown on the tail feathers, and then like a bluish white / gray on the forehead that just turns into my standard off-white underneath, black spots under here, yellow beak, kind of a tanny colored eyes. So I think it'll look cute when it's done. So we're actually going to start with the, well, maybe I should start with the blue. I was going to start with the brown, but now I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking maybe the blue is better. I don't know if that's too blue. That's overpowering. Well, we'll find out. If I need to like make it a little bit of an more off-white, we can do that. So we're just going to start down by the beak. Just like with fur, you can build up feathers the same way. So the middle is just going to come straight up. And then the sides are looping off. And then kind of up and over where the eye is. Right, up and over. Oh, being careful by the eye, so you don't want any like weird stray strokes here. Have that coming off. And then just kind of angle this up. Right, so this part will be pretty quick because it's just this blue. Just the forehead. And then it runs into that kind of white. It's probably more of a subtle change than what I'm doing, but we can do some of that with the shadows and highlights. Well, we can have some of it pushing up. It's alright. Right, and just pulling this kind of straight over to the edges. Or to the edges of a different color, because that's really what that is. Right, so there's the blue. Gonna go ahead and do the off-white. That's also pretty straightforward, but it's going to cover the whole body, so this might take just a little bit. There's also, right under where the eyes are, there is just that little bit of where the white kicks in there too, and then the rest of the middle portion here will just be the white. Right, so it's all of this minus these two spots. So I'm going to get that done real fast, and I'll be right back. Now for the brown. That won't take much, right? It's just finishing that off. It's okay if you go a little bit past the edge of the, if we go past the edge of the head, right? Because it's feathers, it's not like a pristine edge, so we don't really have to worry about it. We can just bring that straight out. Worry about blending it. We'll need to blend it a little bit when we start adding the highlights and the shadows, but we don't need to do that yet, not fully. Right, and so just bringing it out and continuing the lines on. So continuing where, these lines had left off. When we get to the feet will be gray. Well, black, but you know, I always draw black as gray. So I am not going to be drawing in the black under the eyes here. I'll allow that to stand because I won't have to. And I think the feet are detached enough it won't really make a difference if I draw in the black of the feet. Sometimes if you're doing that, you know, like if I have to add some black, like if I'm adding like a, especially with cats that have spots, instead of allowing the spots to stand, if I have to color in one thing, sometimes I have to color in everything because otherwise it looks wrong. I don't think that's going to happen here. I think the feet are detached enough it won't really matter. All right, so we'll do that, and then the tail, I'm just going to see how it looks. Yeah. And the tail feathers down here. Right, again, pretty straightforward. Comes straight down. In theory, you can have it all coming off that center point and extending out. Sometimes when I'm actually drawing feathers, I do that. Kind of doing it, I guess, right now. I suppose I could do that. And in that case, you kind of do the opposite of how I usually draw, where you draw the center point, but then you angle the other lines away from the center point and out. And that'll give the impression that the feather is you know, extending outward or whatever. Okay, so now we have the beak, which is a nice bright yellow. Also pretty straightforward, also pretty small, right? So we have the beak. This does need to be a little bit more crisp, but some of that will be happening because of the feathers around it. So it's not all just up to the lines in the yellow to keep it nice and pristine. Right, and you can kind of see how I'm looping it. Basically the opposite of what I was just doing with the feather. With the beak, I am looping it inward towards the center point because it's just a little easier when you start adding highlights and shadows. It's small enough, though, I don't actually know that would matter. Won't take too long to do the beak. Right, and so this is what we're left with. He does look pretty cute, right? I'm going to go ahead and get the gray in on the legs, just so that they're there. And, you know, birds' feet are pretty knobbly. So they have, you know, it goes in and it comes out, and then you'll have the talons. Middle toes always a little longer. You'll have a bulge typically at the end. Their feet tend to look very interesting. This particular angle is a little easier to draw than some of the others, though. Make sure it's nice and angly, give it a nice little talon. And then the same thing on the other side. Knobbly little feet. Longer in the middle. I think I actually drew the other side a little better as far as the sketch goes for bird feet. Just bringing it all the way back into the body. Don't forget the talons, which are nice, straight, and sharpy, pointy looking things. Some knobs, a bulge at the end, and a talon. Right, so if we take everything off, that's what we are left with. Looks pretty cool. Okay, well, I think I'm going to have, as always, I feel like this is just par for the course, the light source coming from above and to the right. As always, it's above and in front of, not behind or next to. And we're going to get started with the blue. I am going to lighten the blue up just a smidge, though, and see how that goes. And I think I'm going to have this on at least, well, maybe not here. So, underneath the eyes will be in shadow. It's just because, as the eye rounds down into the eye, it will go in shadow. There's probably a little bit of shadowing over here, but for the most part, this is all going to be in highlight. And so highlight, right, that's that full pin pressure here. That runs right into the nose. Instead of full pin pressure, I can do more lines, so anytime I'm working on something or in a space that's a little trickier or trying to blend it in, I will instead just sort of revert to having more lines instead of more pin pressure. And then just sort of working it up. Right, and so all edges are in shadow, so there is some manner of shadowing that's going to be happening. So I am actually going to just more lines on the edges here instead of more pin pressure, and then pushing into more pin pressure. The reason for that is the more pin pressure I add, the thicker the line becomes. And if it's a really thick line going into an area that's going into shadow, it can be hard to sort of blend it nicely. So by instead backing off the pin pressure and just using lines to do it, it keeps the line small, which makes it a little better blendable. Whatever. You get it. Words are hard, y'all. Words are hard. Yeah, I do think the rest of this is going to be a highlight. Really. So maybe a little bit. I'll do a little bit over here. And then I can decide. Right. Even still, that's not going to be a lot. Alright, so I'm going to do the rest of this in highlight, and I'll be right back. The next area we're going to do is just the white, because that's going to take the longest. It's not hard. It's just a matter of figuring out shadows. A lot of this will be in highlight. You are certainly going to have some shadowing, though, on this back side. And it's rounded, so, right, I mentioned, well, I probably haven't, because I mentioned it, I think, in a different video. You want to think about the shape that animals are, right? So this is like a ball. The bird is basically a ball with another little tiny ball up here. And so thinking about how, if you put a ball with a light source above and to the right, how that shadowing would look, because the only real thing that's creating an obstacle that would change that in the bird's face is the beak here. And that's going to be confined to sort of this area here, right? And that's going to determine, it's going to be determined by our highlight angle, right? So if the sun's like here, then that would come down in this angle, right? Making this the area that'll be in shadow by the beak. And the rest of that would go then back into highlight. I'm giving myself a little bit of extra room to work with, but otherwise the rest of that'll be in highlight. And of course we have this section down here where it's connecting. And then, otherwise it is just a giant ball. So underneath, of course, you're going to have a shadow. The backside, you're going to have a shadow, not forgetting that there's some brown here. Probably want to make the shadow a little deeper, especially as we're coming under, right? You're going to have a nice deep shadow probably over here. So this nice deep shadow over here and underneath. And then again, all edges are in shadow, so even on this side, you're going to have a little bit of shadowing. That's how we indicate something is rounded. Right, and I'm going to taper that off as it would be going into the brown instead. because even though this is the side of the light source isn't directly to the side. That means that this is rounding away from the light source, even though it is on that same side. And then as we come underneath, deepening that out a bit, just like we are on the other side. Right, deepening out that shadow. Because underneath, well, now you have the whole, the whole bird as it rounds away. It just depends on when it starts rounding. But it's a nice plump round bird, so I feel like it would have plenty of rounding room. I'm not wording that the best. Don't have to worry about edges so much. It's feathers, so just like with fur, some of it would be coming off, and we're running into more, feathers down underneath. Totally fine. And then other than this, the rest of the white will be in highlight. I just have to make sure I feel like I've cut it on the far side right. That I have it's easier to add highlight than take it away. So if I add too much highlight, it's harder for me to adjust. So it's better that I get the shadows in and I get them in correctly. So I don't have to be like, oh, this isn't quite right. Make that smoother transitions. This nice and deep on the back side. And even as we come up, right, you can kind of see that. Even on the back side, so this is still, and then it goes away. And yeah, I think that is good. So then the rest of this is just highlight, just making sure I'm doing right by the eyes. Just that full pin pressure, just like we did with the blue, except where we're trying to blend it, right? Down here, I'm going to add more lines, not more pin pressure. That'll make it easier to blend as we add more and more highlight. And then if I need to brighten it up more and more and more, I can add more and more and more lines, and that'll quickly do it, brighten it up. Right, so I'm gonna finish out the white because the rest of it, as I said, is highlight, and I will be right back. So I'm just going to blend the white in a little bit more. And that's just taking, very, very light pin pressure and picking and choosing exactly where I'm adding more lines so that I don't brighten it up too much, but I brighten it up enough that it blends. The transition from shadow to highlight is hopefully smooth and seamless and not like a drawing transition. So that's just a matter of taking very light brush strokes, and kind of creating, I often will call it a runway, right? Like I give myself enough space in the shadow area to brighten up, to make it a little bit of a smoother transition. Some spots I already did, and in other areas it becomes a little bit more obvious, so I'm just, smoothing out basically the areas I don't think I transitioned as nicely in. Not hard to do. It's just a matter of, and again, very light pin pressure. It would not do well with heavy pin pressure. Or any awkward gaps anywhere. Sometimes that happens too. Because of the nature of this style. And you can have some areas that it doesn't have to follow the rules fully like a ball, so because it is a bird, it has contours and feathers and ruffles and things like that. It can have some areas where it's not a perfectly rounded area that is in shadow, where it's dipping or pulling in or going up a bit, but as long as it's not extreme, that's fine. It's just because the bird itself is a bird and not a ball, so it's not a perfectly rounded object, and it wouldn't be and then we'll get into the brown. Yeah, and that makes it a lot smoother so that it's harder to tell. Okay, so then we have the brown. There's not much to the brown. The biggest bit is the tail. And some of it's in shadow, right? We're on the edge, so we have some shadow. I'm probably going to add some highlight here because you don't want I don't necessarily want a transition from highlight to shadow happening in a color change, because then it just looks like that's the color. It doesn't look like it's a shadow. It just looks like, oh, this is a light brown. And so I'm probably going to add a bit of highlight on the light brown in between the blue and the edge, so that it doesn't look like it's just one darker brown. Luckily it flushes out a little bit more on the sides, alleviate some of that, and we were already transitioning to shadow on some of the blue back here, so on the far side we're all right because there was already a transition that had taken place. On the top and the right side where the highlight is, not as much. I have to be a little bit more mindful of that. Right, and then this shadow would only be, we'd be continuing that up, so there would be some highlighting there too. But let's finish out over here and then figure out exactly. See, some of that would be in highlight easily. It's really that band along the top of the head here that I'm most worried about integrating, because that's really where that transition happens without a whole lot of space to work with. Okay, so then we'll just add more lines, right, to brighten it up, just like we were doing before, so that we get a distinctly brighter area without, hopefully without having a harsh transition. And I had kind of already backed off pin pressure for the blue anyway, so that they can blend in. You know, one of those words is right. A little easier. Right, it's just on that edge because the edge then transitions away. Right, and then over here we start getting into where we have shadow in the blue. Okay. Right, so then we'll have the shadow for the edge of the bird. Again, on the right side, not so deep. Right, so some of this for sure. And on the left side deeper. Right, so all of this for sure, and we'll try to match that same roundedness we were creating with our lines before we transitioned off, right? So it's roughly through here, I think we have, and then it would cut up as we go, you know, as our angle changes. Cuts in a bit. So all of this shadow, and then because we have less space, it'll actually be a little easier down in here, less than the top, but down in here to add more lines to brighten it up, right? Because we want to do that same thing, just adding more lines. And making sure it blends in. So once again, I can't put full pin pressure here. I don't have enough space for that. So it's just more lines and blending in. So I'm going to finish the rest of the brown on the top. And on the feathers on the bottom, these are going to be in shadow, so I'm going to go ahead and do that as well. Just shadow them in with the light pin pressure, and I'll be right back. Not sure I'm sold on the tail. Those little tail feathers. I might ditch it or make it smaller, but I can do all of that. I can do that later. So we're going to jump to the beak. Which is yellow. Yellow. So nice and small. Not much with the beak, really. Gonna have maybe a little bit of shadowing on this back side as it would round down, and then like underneath here where it would be rounding under. Not much because it's not a big area. Same thing on this side though, right? It's rounding under, so you'd have some shadowing here. Maybe it needs to be a little deeper on the left. And then otherwise it's going to be in highlight. Just sort of making sure it's blended in. Sometimes when you have much less space, like a beak like this, I'll fill it all the way in with shadow. And sometimes I will instead just bear through the highlight a little bit more intensely. Because those transitions, it's going to be harder to notice, you know, if it's not blending right than it is if you have this whole big circle, like with the body of the bird. Sometimes with a small area like a beak, you can cheat it a little bit. Right, but nice and quick because we're almost done now. but still good enough. You can see some shadowing, some highlighting. I want some of this to be distinctively different than the other side though. Yeah. Right, and that gives the shadow underneath the beak. It makes it make more sense to our eyes. Because without the beak being, you know, filled in, it just kind of looks weird. But now there's actual weight to the beak. Shadows and highlights here. It makes sense that we have the shadow coming off. Okay, so gonna go ahead and get the feet. I always am good about taking whatever color I used and put it in my swatch down here, but I didn't do that. I don't really know why I didn't do that. I wasn't thinking about it, so I'm just sort of having to choose another gray. I'm gonna do the feet all in shadow, and I'll be right back. Gonna add a little bit of highlighting. Not much. I think just a little bit on the feet. Each individual foot, top weighted on that highlight for where the light source is. Ramming back into the foot, which can ram all the way into the bird body because of the direction of the highlight, not so much on the other side. Right, all three. Maybe even a little bit on the talon. Or talons, plural, instead of my singular talon. On this side, it's going to be more in shadow. It's more the back here might be, and maybe a little bit here. We do want to give it some weight. And then here, but I'm not going to go all the way to the body. The bird would be blocking that. Well, yeah, the bird would be blocking that. I was going to say potentially. He's contorted himself in such an interesting way. These little guys. All right. And then the final thing before I decide whether or not to keep the legs and the tail are the eyes. Oops, no, the eyes are going to be kind of a light brownie. I will need my sketch layer for that. So we're going to start by drawing the pupil, which is not going to be as big as that purple that's there. Same thing on this side, but it is weighted more towards the middle. That's how we get it to look like it's looking at us. And then I'm going to very lightly fill in around the edge of the eye. As soon as I can take this sketch layer off, I will. Once I get both eyes down. And then we just kind of go in a circle around the eye, around the pupil, around the eye. Which I guess it kind of is around the eye. To draw in the eye. I know I'm quite a wordsmith here. I'm just debating on if I'm going to go up into the top. I don't think I will. I don't think we need to. So then for that, we're going to follow this down. Right, there's going to be a little bit of a descending curve to that. Same on this side. A little bit of a descending curve as it comes down. A little bit of a descending curve as it comes down, following that upper contour. And then, you know, following it all the way around. Next step in this process, just making sure on the right layer everything looks good. I'm going to take the elliptical marquee tool, going to create a circle, as one does with the elliptical marquee tool. Come down here. erase out and then inverse. We're going to cross draw to fill in right by the pupil. Make sure it's nice and filled in except at the top. Select inverse again, reselect the elliptical marquee tool, drag it over to the other side. Do the same thing. Erase. Select inverse. Grab the hard brown brush tool again, and then, you know, don't have to stay drawing in the same direction. In fact, it will work better if you don't. Alright, it just makes the pupil nice and, you know, rounded. And then I'm just debating on if I clip off this top. Right, if I just clip off that top. A point where the lines are thin. Yeah, okay. Now, we're going to have a burst of highlight against the pupil on the opposite side of the light source. Fading better than what I just did. And then the same thing on this side, so true on both sides, comes all the way under. Against the pupil would be going into shadow on the side of the light source, but the side of the light source you still have where the eye is gonna have some color. Going into shadow at the edge, right? So all of that edge is shadow. I'm just connecting that together. There's not a lot of space to work with on his eyes. Because of course there's not. So cute. And then the rest of this, we're going to bring this a little closer. Let's highlight before it goes into shadow. The rest of this will be in shadow. So light pin pressure, filling that in. Same as we come up here, the transition from this into black. And then over here, same thing, but working with a ton less space, right? So we have a little bit of highlight coming there, crashing into the bottom of our little strip against the eye. That highlight down, edge of the eye in shadow. So going into shadow as it comes down. And then just connecting together. And then the rest of that in shadow. And that's just, you know, light pin pressure. Fill in the rest of that. And then we can brighten up the eyes as needed, which we will, from where we currently have it a bit. And then over here it's a little easier because there's much less space. Right, so I'm going to brighten up through here, right? Really brighten this up. Probably actually going to add another little color. I don't usually do this, especially not on something where it's so little space, but I might as well. Can make it a little, it's already so bright. Usually I'd add some brighter tone to it, but it is already so bright. I don't know if that would really work. Usually I wouldn't go darker, but we can see what that does if I just add like a burst of red. I don't know how that will look. Don't usually do a darker like this on a lighter. I usually do the opposite. And all I'm doing, I don't know if you can see this very well. All I'm doing is squiggling it, right? I'm going up and down and up and down. Pushing all the way to the pupil, coming straight back out. But I don't want to push into the pupil, so those areas where I've done that I need to fix. It'll add a slightly different color to what's already happening. It's just usually you don't want to do this with a darker color. You want to do it with a lighter one. So I might add a third color and see what that does. Take that same vein and make it brighter again. Make that on top. And then have that as an additional color. That's a lot of detail, but I don't know. Yeah, I guess it makes the eyes warmer. So maybe we'll stick with that. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to do is add the light flare. I'm going to come in here with the elliptical marquee tool, make a little circle. It won't be big. And adjust. And then fill it with the foreground color, which I've already changed to white. Drag it over and do the same thing on this side at roughly the same height from the bottom of the pupil. Yeah, and then the last thing I'll do with that is take the lasso tool, come in here and make it look like feathers are in the way so that this side it's less prominent and you have that hint of like feather blockage happening. So then I can come down here and drop. Yeah, it's pretty cute. I wonder, I know I said I might make some adjustments here. Let me just find the right layer. Copy this twice, so I'm going to erase the tail on one version and the body on the other. Oh, actually, let's keep that in place because then I can, if I can find the original base layer for the brown, I can do the same thing. Yep, there it is. So, copy layer 10, turn it off, copy layer 10 again. On this version, we're erasing out the body, and we'll select inverse that and erase out the tail. Okay. Now what's what? Okay, that's the body. So tail I'm going to copy again and drag up to whichever one of these is the tail as well. Of course it was this one. Copy this again. I know, I do this a lot. Alright. Merge down. So, I can bring this up, have less of a tail, but in the process am I about to do something crazy? I'm just trying to see what this would look like. Or do I just turn it off? And he doesn't have a tail. I think I like him better without the tail. Yeah, I think we won't add a tail. I don't know, I'm kind of sold on the legs though, so I'm probably going to leave that. Because it looks so ridiculous. And yet that's exactly how they look, as they stand there with their legs splayed out like that, holding reeds. Somehow, this big floof of a bird doesn't break its little tiny slender legs. It's adorable. Alright, so that's how you draw a bearded Reedling. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done. I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.